We now have learned that through documents have become declassified, that Jim Comey communicated to someone who held your former position, the Director of National Intelligence under the Obama administration, Jim Clapper, that he could not sufficiently corroborate the Steele dossier. And then, right around that time, this is at the very end of the Obama administration in January of 2017, he signs off on a FISA renewal of Carter Page, who was a U.S. asset. The CIA told the FBI he was, not a Russian asset, but they didn't care. And they put the Steele dossier in as verified, and Jim Comey signed off on it. But so he was pushing back with Clapper not to say it wasn't corroborated, even though he was telling Clapper that, Rick.
Yeah, I'm glad that this information is coming out. We've known this for a while internally, and I'm glad that it's finally revealed. This just shows that Comey and Clapper were highly political. And I can't believe that Jim Clapper, in finding out this information, didn't immediately say, I got to go forward and make clear the truth, where Comey was clearly trying to muddy the waters and do everything he could to help elect Hillary Clinton, throw dirt on Donald Trump. This is why it's so scary to me, the weaponization of government, when leaders of the FBI and the DNI are scheming together to cover up the truth in order to help a political candidate. Now think about that. The FBI knew that information they were pushing was wrong and not accurate, and they did it during an election because they wanted to ensure that someone wouldn't become president. This is what we hear about in third world countries, and yet it's happening here. We need a total clean out of the FBI. It hasn't happened. It needs to happen. They're not facing the mistakes that they've made, and this is just another example to show that more needs to be done to clean up the FBI.
Written about for us at aclj.org, and that's the nomination of Bill Burns to lead the CIA. I know we've talked about it on this broadcast before, but I really think a couple of nominations that are out there, both Bill Burns and then also Javier Becerra to lead the HHS, represent some real problems for conservatives, for people seeking consensus on these issues. I know you talked about on this broadcast how you were initially supportive of Bill to lead the agency because he's been a long-term consumer of CIA products, but I am hearing more and more on the Hill, a lot of trepidation, just based on how deep his ties are in China. I know that is your concern as well, but I think as we're now moving into a phase where more of these nominations are going to be hitting the floor of the Senate, I think it's important for this to be front and center in people's minds. So specifically on Bill Burns, what's your latest thought on that? Is this somebody that the United States Senate should be confirming, or do you think there's a chance he can be defeated?
I definitely think there's a chance that he can be defeated with the new revelations about his ties to China. Let's be clear, he had a diplomatic career that was impressive. And he spent, 33 years as a diplomat, as an outsider, consuming intelligence. And I initially thought this is a good person to lead the CIA because he'll bring a completely different set of eyes to the process. He didn't grow up in the intelligence community in the gathering of information, but he's been consuming it. But what he's done the last 6 years after he left the diplomatic community is of concern. For 6 years, he's been raising money for his NGO, leading an NGO, which has largely been focused on China and cozying up to China and getting our congressional staffers better relationships with Chinese communist leaders. This is a real problem for somebody, especially as a nominee to run the CIA. I would think he'd be more appropriate for our ambassador in China or another job. But this post, I think, is troublesome. And I've heard from a number of senators that they also are troubled. And we'll have to see how his confirmation hearings go and what Republican senators are going to do to stand up against this.
Interesting enough, Rick, Joe Biden was asked about China. This is probably the toughest question he got from Anderson Cooper. And of course, we didn't get much from Joe Biden, but I want you to just comment on this exchange because I found it just really bizarre. Bite number 7.
When you talk to him, though, about human rights abuses, is that as far as it goes in terms of the U.S., or is there any actual repercussions for China?
Well, there will be repercussions for China, and he knows that. What I'm doing is making clear that we, in fact, are going to continue to reassert our role as spokespersons for human rights at the UN and other agencies that have an impact on their attitude. China is trying very hard to become the world leader.
So again, Rick, what do you think about that? It's very bizarre.
Look, let's be very clear of what Joe Biden just said. He said we're going to utilize the UN and we're going to do what we can through the UN. China and President Xi love that answer. That's exactly what they want, because at the UN, China plays a duplicitous role. They get a veto at the Security Council as a superpower, but they also, outside of the UN Security Council, organize with a group of developing nations called the G77. So they have all of these small developing nations looking to them to say, yeah, we're all in the same boat. We're all 4 developing nations. And China plays that role because they have that side of China, which is poor and which is still developing. And so we've allowed China to have this dual role at the UN. And when Joe Biden says we're going to just go to the Human Rights Council and bring up our issues, China loves that. That's the weakest possible answer. I also think that Joe Biden should have just said to Anderson Cooper, I'm not going to tell you about my conversations with President Xi, but make no mistake, I've made clear on this, that, or the other. To go into detail of what he said to a world leader, I think really gives it away that the conversation was one way and that China presented what they wanted and we just acquiesced.
Well, yeah, in this next question, Anderson Cooper followed up. And again, what's astonishing is that Joe Biden is basically saying in this next comment, I'll play it for everybody and get Rick's reaction, is that, well, this is the Chinese way of governing. Take a listen, bite 5.
We can't. What my comment to him was, and I know him well, and he knows me well. We're a 2-hour conversation.
You talked about this too.
I talked about this too, and that's not so much refugee, but I talked about it. I said, look, Chinese leaders, if you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So the central, vastly overstated, the central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that.
When China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So is Joe Biden, Rick, excusing the concentration camps for the Muslim community in China?
Joe Biden has a 42-year career of being an apologist for China. It's why they overplay Russia. It's why they say, don't look at China. It's why Hunter Biden's laptop is so important. They have hired individuals like Jake Sullivan and others that have, on the record, said some really outrageous predictions about the rise of China. This is a team that doesn't believe that we can beat China. Remember, he said, they're going to eat our lunch, or flip-flopping saying they can't eat our lunch. He doesn't have any type of vision other than being friendly. He wants everyone to like him. And therefore, this consensus idea with Europe and with others is going to reign the day. We aren't going to get policies that are good for the United States. We're going to get policies that are good for the global community.